Part 28. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 271. The sound of ghosts weeping and wailing was released from the strange purple box, which made people shudder just listening to it. After hearing Luo Ziyuan's explanation, everyone couldn't help but look horrified, and looked in surprise at the terrifying box in front of them that released ghosts and ghosts all over the sky. The box of monsters. They had no idea that the third lost sacred object from Zilan base would actually appear in a remote village at the foot of the mountain. The black light released from the box reflected on the world, and the extremely cold air made everyone feel like they were in a netherworld. Then, what is in that box? The rebels and the others had been seriously injured, but now they felt the terrifying aura inside the box, their hairs stood on end, and their bodies trembled. Luo Ziyuan stared at the demon box in Mu Qiu's hand and was about to speak. But suddenly, countless ghosts and ghosts emerged from the box and began to cry and dance around Mu Qiu. What no one expected was that these ghastly ghosts with red eyes would rush towards Mu Qiu the next second. Ghost Devourer. The first thing the ghost that emerged from the box did was to devour Mu Qiu, the owner of the box. But Mu Qiu stood there, holding the purple-black demon box in his hand, his body stagnant, and a gleam flashed in his eyes. Less than 3 feet in front of him, a large number of ghosts were already attacking and killing him. This scene was something that no one expected. Good opportunity. Get rid of him together first. The 3 purple-robed men were floating in the air, feeling the terrifying aura coming from the demon's box. Even they felt heart palpitations. Just a box makes them, as S-class awakened ones, so afraid. In an instant, the 3 of them reached a consensus and immediately ordered their men and a group of mummy villagers to attack the figure surrounded by ghosts. It is different from the tactics of consuming Luo Ziyuan. This time, they are determined to win. I saw a row of black laser cannons aimed at Mu Qiu. As the trigger was pulled, laser beams filled the sky for an instant and shot out like dense rain. At the same time, the mummified villagers scurrying in front could no longer hide their bloodthirsty instincts and pounced on Mu Qiu with their claws. Not good. The rebels and the others looked at this devastating offensive with a look of horror in their eyes. In such a terrifying siege, even Luo Ziyuan could not save his life. Countless laser cannons were seen exploding at Mu Qiu's location like thunder from the sky. The dense rain of blue laser light instantly illuminated the entire village. In an instant, the sky was covered with blue aurora, and hot air waves slapped the cheeks of everyone present. The violent explosion shook everyone's eardrums, and the ground in front was filled with smoke and dust, and the ground was torn apart. Immediately afterwards, a group of mummified villagers from behind rushed forward. They are all eager to take the first bite of fresh flesh and blood from the awakened ones. However, when these mummified villagers, who were even more powerful than zombies, rushed into the billowing smoke, they no longer lived. The dust stirred up by the explosion swept quickly, and combined with the thick darkness of night, it was difficult to see what was going on inside. Until the smoke and dust dissipated, a figure stood in the silent darkness. How is that possible? Everyone held their breath and stared at the slender figure standing in front of them with horrified eyes. Mu Qiu was seen wearing a spotless white shirt, her head was lowered, and her broken hair was flying in the wind. The hurricane blew over his body, revealing his slender figure. Under Mu Qiu, shriveled corpses had fallen to the ground, with wide-open eyes full of fear and surprise. But what attracts the most attention is the slender long knife in his hand. This long sword has the overall shape of a sword, with a deep purple color on the handle, and blood-like lines engraved on the blade. The whole knife gives people a strange and evil feeling, and the blade is still shining with blood, which makes people shudder. And around the blade, the souls of ghostly purple ghosts were circling around with red eyes. The undead souls from hell are clustered on both sides of the blade, and the sound of ghosts crying and howling can be heard endlessly. This is Everyone's eyes were focused on Muqiu and the demonic blade that was surrounded by dead souls in his hand, and they looked panic-stricken. Luo Ziyuan also looked solemnly and slowly said, "It is rumored that it complements the Devil's Box and is regarded by countless people as the supreme ferocious weapon with the ability to suck souls and devour souls. Demon Sword Yama." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a gasping sound from around him. Muqiu was seen holding a demon knife, and there were countless ghosts around him, as if they were afraid of something. They no longer pounced and bit at Muqiu, but instead clung to the demonic knife that glowed with blood-colored lines. Yama. The corners of Muqiu's mouth raised slightly. "It seems that this knife is really destined to me." Muqiu waved the blade, bringing up boundless bloody evil energy, and Muqiu's whole body was filled with black energy. When this black energy attaches to the demon sword, the countless ghosts wrapped around both sides of the demon sword suddenly become fierce and powerful. The mighty evil spirit filled everyone's nerves, and Muqiu's footsteps also slowly approached the front. Feeling the fierce evil spirit that was constantly rising from Muqiu, the three purple-robed men looked at each other, knowing that they could no longer retain their strength at this time, and immediately gave orders. This time, everyone, including the mummy villagers and the black-robed followers, rushed forward and surrounded Muqiu layer by layer. The next second, the mummy villagers who came from all directions rushed towards Muqiu with their fangs and claws. And behind them were a group of powerful black-robed followers, holding all kinds of weapons with amazing destructive power and launching a fierce attack on Muqiu. In an instant, artillery fire roared, corpses were everywhere, and the huge attack was about to engulf Muqiu. But Muqiu stood in place, calm and composed. I saw Muqiu holding the bloody Yama demon sword. The blood-like lines on the demon sword began to tremble slightly, as if there were living blood vessels running on the blade. When Muqiu slowly raised the demon sword in front of his chest, the blood color on the blade gradually faded. Instead, a series of dark purple cold evil spirits appeared. The next second, Muqiu opened his lips slightly and said word by word, "Qi Mei Wanling." The blade surrounded by evil spirits swiftly passed through the air, breaking the space in front of him, and instantly inserted into the ground under Muqiu's feet. The moment the blade was inserted into the ground, accompanied by a vibration, the ground centered on the demon sword actually began to appear spider-web-like cracks. The state of these cracks was also extremely strange, and wisps of black evil spirits emanated from the cracks. In the middle, you can faintly hear the ghosts crying and wailing as if from the netherworld of hell. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 272. The next moment, more ghosts climbed out of the cracks in the earth. These ghosts are even hungrier and thirstier than the mummified villagers, and their bodies exude a shuddering gloomy evil aura. What's even more terrifying is that these dead souls are all blood red, as if they are miserable souls crawling out of the sea of blood in the netherworld. In the blink of an eye, these bloody ghosts, which seemed to have crawled out of the netherworld, struggled to attack the mummified villagers. Only when they saw these real lonely ghosts, the eyes of the mummy monsters transformed by the villagers showed humanized fear. And these bloody ghosts imprisoned in the demon sword are even more ferocious, specializing in eating blood and souls. In just a moment, a large number of mummies had already been pierced through the chests by these wailing and screaming bloody souls. The already shriveled body was completely turned into white bones, and the soul was devoured by these many blood souls, making his death miserable. What kind of ghosts are these? Everyone couldn't help but shudder as they saw a large number of mummies being devoured by the bloody ghosts emerging from the underground abyss. There are countless souls sacrificed by blood imprisoned in the demon sword. These innocent souls have been contaminated by the evil nature of the demon sword during the years of sacrifice. After being released, he became even more bloodthirsty and soul-devouring, extremely ferocious. Luo Ziyuan explained in a weak tone that he was thinking about other things at the moment. Uncle. Suddenly, a slightly childish voice came from far and near. A familiar voice reached his ears, and Luo Ziyuan heard it. I happened to see a half-grown boy whose lower body turned into 4 golden hooves running from a distance. It's Yumming. Everyone looked happy after seeing the young man's figure. Mao Yumming felt the wind at his feet and rushed in front of everyone in the blink of an eye. Due to the intense running, there was a trace of cold sweat on the young man's forehead. Mao Yumming gasped, "Everyone, is everyone okay?" But then, Mao Yumming realized that everyone's eyes were not focused on him at all. He followed everyone's gaze and was immediately stunned. Not far ahead, I saw a slender figure wearing a white shirt holding a long blood-red knife, but under his feet were gloomy bones everywhere. There are bloody ghosts floating in the air, still looking for fresh targets to devour. The next moment, figures of men in black robes suddenly appeared around Mu Qiu. These men in black robes were armed with knives, forks, and sticks, and they launched the most brutal killing moves towards Mu Qiu. Immediately afterwards, 3 purple-robed men stood in the wind above Mu Qiu. One person transformed into a tiger orc, with a strong body and sinister claws attacking the heavenly spirit above Mu Qiu. A man with an agile figure held a mechanical bow and arrows and shot at Mu Qiu's vitals from all directions. There was also a purple-robed man standing still, but a powerful soul wave was released in front of him, directly hitting Mu Qiu's soul. In an instant, a desperate killing array emerged against Mu Qiu alone. Facing this deadly siege that could easily defeat an S-class awakener, Mu Qiu didn't panic at all. Mu Qiu was seen standing the demon sword in his hand in front of him, raising his fingers together and swiping across the demon sword with blood light. The area touched by Mu Qiu's finger instantly turned black, and the blood-like lines were instantly covered by black energy. Click. In an instant, the demon sword's blade cracked along the bloody lines. The moment the blade shattered, it turned into streaks of bloody light that cut through the sky. The blade fragments, which seemed to be alive, penetrated directly into the bodies of the black-robed cultists. What's even more weird is that the moment these blade fragments with boundless evil energy broke through the bodies of those black-robed men, the blood from the wound flew wildly like a kite with its string broken, pouring into bloody fragments the size of fingers. And the moment the blood poured in, those fragments suddenly glowed with blood. Even the blood color on the ghosts floating around became more intense, and the extremely ferocious evil spirit became stronger and stronger. The fate of those black-robed believers whose bodies were penetrated and whose wounds were opened was even more miserable. Some men in black robes who could not control the loss of blood in their bodies turned into shriveled mummies in just a few breaths. Even those powerful awakened ones were not spared. Even those who saved their lives became extremely weak after the loss of essence and blood. Not good. The purple-robed man who turned into an orc saw more fragments rushing towards them, and his pupils suddenly trembled. The man in purple robe subconsciously raised his arms to try to block it. But the usually powerful body seems to be defenseless in front of these bloody blades. The blades all over the sky instantly penetrated the orc's skin and penetrated deep into the muscles. Then passing behind the orc, blood-red light shines on the tiny blade fragments. On the other hand, the orc's body was shriveled up, and there were lines of blood flowing out of the wounds that were holed by sharp blades. And the momentum of those bloody blades continued unabated after penetrating the orcs, and they rushed directly towards the arrows in the sky as if they had intelligence. The bloody blade collided with the laser arrows, and the overwhelming arrows broke like toothpicks without any trace left. The man in purple robe holding a bow in mid-air faced the pursuing blade fragments, his figure kept flashing in the air, and he was about to emerge from the after image. However, just after escaping a round of blade pursuit, a gust of wind flashed behind the purple-robed man. "It's pretty fast." A calm voice came from my ear, and if you listen carefully, it seems to be accompanied by a smile. The purple-robed man turned his head in panic, and saw Mu Qiu's figure. At this moment, the blood-red blades in the sky were instantly inserted into Mu Chiu's hands like a beast returning to a cage. In an instant, the purple-robed man with an extremely swift figure was pierced by the blood-red blade fragments, and became a hedgehog covered in blood. The strange demon sword with blood-red lines on the blade appeared in Mu Chiu's hand again, and the blood light on the blade was boiling like a hot flame. Then, Mu Chiu's figure flashed, and this time the target was the only remaining soul power awakener. The purple-robed man saw that his two companions died so easily under the blood-red demon sword, and his eyes were horrified. He immediately turned around and wanted to escape. However, the next second, several blood-red ghosts full of evil spirits blocked his way. To say that he was not afraid of these ghosts and spirits whose realm was far lower than his on weekdays. But now he is racing against death, and 1 second is enough to kill him without a burial place. The purple-robed man used soul impact to annihilate several blood souls that blocked his way. Just as he was about to escape, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Then, he felt the blood in his body flowing back crazily, pouring out along the wound behind him. The blade on his chest was flashing with strange blood and was stained with blood. What made the purple-robed man even more desperate was that his soul was also being slowly drawn away by this demon sword. It seems that you haven't stimulated its instinct yet. Mu Chiu casually drew out the demon sword. He could feel that this weapon was still not satisfied after absorbing so many flesh and blood souls. The demon sword brought boundless murderous aura and broke through the air. A bloodline suddenly appeared on the neck of the purple-robed man. In the blink of an eye, the powerful purple-robed man in front of him had been separated from his head, and blood was spilled in the sky. When everyone came to their senses, they saw this scene. Mu Chiu was fiddling with the bloody blade in his hand, and under his feet were countless eerie skeletons. The blood in the air turned into bloodlines and continuously flowed into the demon sword called Yan Mo. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 273. Under the dark night, the village at the foot of the mountain was shrouded in a burst of blood. On the side of the hillside where the village backs up, Lu Qianqian looks graceful in a red cheongsam. The enchanting beauty held up her charming cheeks and looked at the scene happening at the foot of the mountain, her face flushed. The rebels, including Luo Ziyuan, looked stiffly at the white figure in front of them. The air was filled with the suffocating smell of blood, and the crimson blood gradually spread to the horizon, dyeing the night sky red. And the skinny and shriveled corpses of human beings can be seen everywhere. Some of these corpses have sallow complexions and are as thin as mummies, while others are wearing black robes and look weird. But without exception, these corpses all had expressions of horror on their faces, as if they had experienced some great horror before they died. Even at this moment, strands of blood were still flowing out of those shriveled corpses. The blood turned into blood threads and danced in the air, as if attracted by something. The bloodlines all over the sky are gathering in one direction. And right in front of everyone's sight, where countless blood gathered, a slender figure wearing a white shirt came into everyone's sight. I saw a strange demonic sword shining with blood standing in front of Mu Chiu. All the bloodlines flowing back like a tide actually merged into the blade of that demon sword. After the bloody demon sword swallowed countless blood, the blood on the sword became more intense. The lines on the bloodshot threads flowed on the blade as if they were alive. You can also faintly hear the sound of weeping ghosts and howling souls, which is chilling. Around Mu Chiu, there were countless bloody souls visible to the naked eye, wandering among the corpses on the ground. Wherever the blood soul passed, there were all gloomy bones. Even the remaining souls attached to the corpses were swallowed up by these bloody souls from the underworld of hell. This is Brother Chiu. Mao Yuming's face turned pale as he looked at the white figure surrounded by ghosts in front of him, a little unbelievable. As soon as Mao Yuming finished speaking, Mu Qiu, who was holding the bloody demon sword in his hand, actually looked at the rebels and his party. Then, under everyone's frightened eyes, Mu Qiu always had a smile on her face. The arm holding the demon sword dropped down and walked slowly towards the direction of everyone. Everyone subconsciously took a few steps back, looking panicked. They were all afraid that Mu Qiu would be controlled by this weird bloody demon knife. The horror of this demonic sword was seen by everyone, even Luo Ziyuan did not dare to face it directly. Mu Qiu's feet were covered with white bones, and the strange demon knife named Yan Mo in his hand drew a bloody glow of Dao Sanyan in the air. And as Mu Qiu moved forward, the gloomy white bones beneath her feet turned into powder and disappeared in the night sky in an instant. To everyone's surprise, when Mu Qiu slowly approached, a purple box with a carved one eye suddenly appeared on his chest. The box of monsters. And the demon sword turned into a bloody stream of light in the next moment and returned to the box in front of Mu Qiu. Countless dead ghosts floating in the air also fell into the box along with the bloody stream of light. The moment the demon box closed, the one eye carved on its front flashed with blood. It was not until this moment that everyone felt that the blood-colored evil aura that filled their hearts with infinite fear had completely disappeared, and the icy cold air surrounding them gradually dissipated. Unknowingly, there were beads of sweat the size of peas on their foreheads. Mu Qiu slowly walked up to the crowd, still playing with the monster box that made them extremely frightened. "I think we can have a good talk now." With a smile in her eyes, Mu Qiu looked at the rebels and the group with deep meaning. Bonfires rise in the village at night. Different from the day, the village now has no life at all. All the villagers were turned into mummies and wiped out in the horrific battle just now. Until now, everyone has understood that the so-called Daowen Mountain village is just an illusory dream. "Brother Qiu, where did you get the box in your hand?" Luo Ziyuan's face turned pale, and even his voice became much softer. Although his injuries have eased somewhat, the severe consumption obviously cannot be recovered in a short time. Luo Ziyuan, who was the backbone of the resistance army, looked at Mu Qiu, who chuckled and shook his head. Luo Ziyuan immediately understood what Mu Qiu meant. In a sense, Mu Qiu had saved their lives, and now there was no need to hide anything. So he smiled bitterly and said, "Brother Qiu, do you know the origin of the box in your hand?" This is a box weapon made by Zilan Base using high-tech metal fusion space technology. Each box corresponds to a unique key. When the box is opened with the key, the corresponding weapon will be released. Mu Qiu rubbed the fine lines on the box, thoughtfully. "Just listen to Luo Ziyuan continue. The box in your hand is the third lost sacred object in Zilan Base, the box of monsters. Back then, the Zilan Base was not as chaotic as it is today, and there was no so-called class system. The top brass of the base have spent a lot of effort to create 3 destruction-level box weapons. 2 of the weapons were successfully crafted, and with their powerful power to destroy the world, they also completely quelled the turmoil of the zombie tide around the base. Thus, these 2 powerful box weapons with destructive power are also regarded as sacred objects by Zilan Base. However, something unexpected happened when creating the third sacred object. Accident. A glint flashed in Mu Qiu's eyes. Yes, the manufacturing process of the third holy object is particularly stringent, and one of the most core materials is actually human blood soul. This sacred object actually requires human blood and soul sacrifice. Because its own evil nature is too great and goes against the harmony of nature, it was immediately collectively boycotted by a large number of humans in the base. In addition, the developer of the creature committed a heinous crime at that time, and the crowd was so excited that he was eventually kicked out of the base. And since then, the third holy object that had just been created has disappeared. During this period, there were naturally people who coveted its powerful power and tried their best to search for it, but the final result was nothing. Mao Yuming sighed on the side, "I never expected that this sacred object would appear in this small mountain village." "No. Luo Ziyuan shook his head slightly and looked at Mu Qiu again. Did Brother Qiu get the box in his hands from Duan Muqing? Mu Qiu nodded slowly. As expected, Luo Ziyuan said the words that surprised his companions. If I guess correctly, Duan Muqing is the developer of sacred objects who was exiled from Zilan base. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 274. What? Although they were prepared, they were still shocked when they heard Luo Ziyuan's guess. Then, what about those villagers? Everyone still found it hard to believe. Since Duan Muqing was the developer who was expelled, what about these villagers who turned into mummies? Luo Ziyuan's eyes showed a thoughtful look. More than a year ago, the temperament of the high-level rulers of Zilan base changed drastically. Gradually, they were no longer satisfied with using zombie monsters for transformation experiments, and instead turned the experimental subjects against fellow humans. After several large-scale human experiments, the cruel behavior soon attracted human resistance, which was also the original origin of the resistance army. The largest and most inhumane experiment was to mix the modified genes extracted from humans and zombies. That experiment caused thousands of humans to die, and although the remaining humans saved their lives, they became terrible beings that were neither human nor zombie. The crowd suddenly realized. Are you saying that these villagers are the survivors of the experiment? Luo Ziyuan nodded. I suspect that Duan Muqing was not expelled from the base, but was hiding here to continue the research and development of the box weapon. After that, his eyes focused on Mu Qiu. To be precise, Luo Ziyuan was more concerned about the box in Mu Qiu's hand. There are many types of box weapons, and the items stored are also strange, but we still divide them into levels according to the level of the awakener. Luo Ziyuan touched the black iron heavy sword behind him. For example, my liming is an S-level box weapon. After opening the box, the sword body turns into a lightning beam, the power doubles, and the destructive power is the top among many box weapons. After speaking, Luo Ziyuan looked at the box in Mu Qiu's hand with a solemn look. And the box of the ghost in the hands of Brother Qiu, the demon sword Yan Mo and the box body complement each other after opening the box. Its ability to imprison blood souls and devour souls and bloodthirstiness gives it the possibility of unlimited growth. From the perspective of rank alone, it should have reached the destruction level. Mu Qiu nodded slightly when he heard this. From the perspective of power alone, the demon sword alone is still a little weak to compete with the real destruction level strongman. But the real horror of this box weapon lies in its ability to devour souls and bloodthirstiness. Refining the blood soul for its own use, swallowing blood to feed itself. This ghostly ability alone gives it unlimited potential for growth. Mu Qiu smiled slightly, put the matter of the box aside, turned to look at Luo Ziyuan and asked. Then Captain Luo, should you explain to us why these people are chasing you? The origin of the candle dragon, this was also Mu Qiu's initial question. Luo Ziyuan smiled bitterly and nodded. It was meaningless to hide it at this time. We learned from the spies planted in the Zilan high level that these people will transport a mysterious box weapon back to the base. And once this box weapon is transported back to the base, the other party is likely to have another destructive level combat power. Now is the critical moment of the stalemate between the two sides. We, the rebels, must not let the other side add a destructive level combat power. That's why I will lead people to stop the box from being transported back to the Zilan base. When Luo Ziyuan said this, his tone seemed a little low. Although they completed the task, the price they paid was extremely heavy. When the team of more than a dozen people returned, only 6 or 7 people were left. The sacrifices were all the scarce awakened combat power in the resistance army. Mu Qiu's eyes suddenly flashed with a gleam of brilliance. What's in that box? Luo Ziyuan paused slightly, and recalled the shocking scene he saw that day, and his eyes could not help but show a look of horror. It's a dragon. It's a real dragon that covers the sky and the sun, with amazing power. Mao Yuming on the side was the first to answer. After the giant dragon rushed out of the box, it rushed directly into the sky, and it disappeared in a whoosh. As he said this, the young man stretched out his hands to the sky to show his length, to show his shock. Mu Qiu knew that the giant dragon they were talking about was the Zilong that he had swallowed. Speaking of which, the energy contained in the Zilong was indeed huge, and even Mu Qiu had never seen such pure blood energy. It is not impossible to use this to give birth to a destructive level strongman. It seems that Luo Ziyuan and his party don't know the origin of Zilong. Mu Qiu looked down at the box in his hand. He suddenly regretted letting the demon sword sacrifice the souls of those purple-robed men. Perhaps he could get some useful clues after interrogating them. Luo Ziyuan looked at Mu Qiu, who looked thoughtful, and said after hesitating for a moment. "Brother Qiu, I suggest that you should not open the box of the monsters too often. This box weapon itself belongs to the category of evil things. It is difficult for ordinary people to control it. If you are not careful, you will be bewitched by it and it will backfire on its owner. And if you use it too much, the person who opens the box will inevitably be infected with the evil nature of the demon sword. It will be even more difficult to escape the control of the demon sword at that time." Luo Ziyuan's words were kind. Although the box of the ghost was regarded as a sacred object by some people with bad intentions, there were very few people who could really manipulate it. Mu Qiu just smiled slightly at Luo Ziyuan's suggestion. "I think this child should be obedient." The child that Mu Qiu mentioned was naturally the box of the ghost, which was known as the lost sacred object in his hand. Mu Qiu narrowed his eyes and gently stroked the blood-colored lines on the surface of the dark purple box. I don't know if it was an illusion, but Luo Ziyuan seemed to see the single eye on the box of the ghost blink suddenly. The flash of his eyes seemed to reveal a humanized fear. As the long talk passed, the sky above was approaching dawn. They originally planned to have a good rest in this village for a night. As a result, what happened that night made them completely give up their intention to rest. In order to avoid any more trouble, Luo Ziyuan knew that he could not delay any longer and told his companions. "We will set off immediately after a little adjustment and must return to the base within 2 days." Mu Qiu also stood up slowly and looked towards the rising sun, playing with a strange purple box in his hand. "I am looking forward to it, Zilan Base. What kind of surprise will you bring me? Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord." Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 275. Under the clear sky, several floating airport vehicles were passing through a mountain forest, spitting out tail flames. If you look carefully, you can see that there are several men and women of different ages sitting on these motorcycles. These people had injuries on their bodies, and even their faces looked a little tired. This group of people was Mu Qiu and his party who had just left Daowen Mountain Village. At this time, it had been a full day since they left the village composed of cannibal mummies. After a long journey day and night, they crossed the barren mountains and took several detours before arriving here. According to Luo Ziyuan, the people chasing them in the mountain village were most likely a main force of the heterosology. In order to prevent other troubles in the future, Luo Ziyuan specially led everyone across the barren mountains and took a long detour to get rid of the pursuers. Several people held the handles, feeling the strong wind blowing by their ears, and the speed of the motorcycle continued to increase. Gradually, the outline of a desolate town appeared in front of everyone. There was a whoosh sound in the air, and the tail flames of the locomotive drew a line of fire in the air. Immediately afterwards, several suspended locomotives carrying people also galloped into the airspace of the town. Entering the town, what you see is a scene that is very different from the ruins full of zombie monsters. The low buildings in the town look dilapidated, and even the walls and floors are covered with old dust. The houses have been reduced to ruins due to years of weathering, and scrapped vehicles can be seen everywhere on the streets. The whole city was even more silent, not to mention the weird zombies gathering together, and there was no sign of any signs of life. It seems that this small town has been abandoned for a long time before the end of the world. This town was once famous for its rich and rare heavy metal elements underground, attracting countless people to come and mine. But later, with the shortage of heavy metal elements, fewer and fewer people were mining, and the entire town quickly became empty of people and turned into a ghost town now. Luo Ziyuan, who was carrying a heavy sword, seemed to know this town very well and knew its history very well. Luo Ziyuan was like a competent tour guide, leading everyone through the streets of the abandoned town. From time to time, Mu Qiu and Lu Jianqian accepted the history of this town. Mu Qiu listened to Luo Ziyuan's introduction to the town beside him, smiled and nodded. He has always been a good listener. After a while, Luo Ziyuan drove the suspended motorcycle to an empty flat land. This is the central square of the entire town, and it used to be the only place where people in the town could relax after dinner. Luo Ziyuan put the motorcycle back into the box and walked into the square. Several other members of the resistance army also put away their floating motorcycles and followed Luo Ziyuan's footsteps quite familiarly. Walked to a stone statue standing in the center of the square. Luo Ziyuan suddenly remembered something, turned around and faced Mu Qiu and the others. You two still need to make some preparations before entering Zilan base. As he said that, Luo Ziyuan took out 2 black robes from nowhere and handed them to Mu Qiu and the others. Then, Luo Ziyuan took out a palm-sized box from his arms. When he opened it, there was something like a seal inside. You two are new faces in the Zilan base, and they can easily arouse the vigilance of the patrol robots in the base. And with that said, Luo Ziyuan stamped the red seal in his hand on the back of Mu Qiu's hand. Mu Qiu immediately felt the soul energy contained in the seal attached to the back of his hand. The seal itself is just an energy conversion container, and the soul energy contained in it is obviously added later. Immediately afterwards, a circular mark appeared on the back of Mu Qiu's hand, with complex lines carved inside. Mu Qiu recognized at a glance that this was the same racial mark as the one on the rebels. Standing next to Luo Ziyuan, Xing, the only female in the resistance, also took out a seal and imprinted it on Lu Jianqian. Although this is only a temporary mark, as long as it is not strictly reviewed, it is enough to deceive the patrol robots in the base. Mu Qiu put on the black windbreaker, which he was very familiar with. He lowered his head and looked at the pattern on the back of his hand. There was a layer of soul energy attached to it, which felt quite novel. Mao Yuming reminded on the side, "Brother Qiu, if you don't have this racial mark, you will be detected as soon as you enter the base." The half-grown kid approached Mu Qiu and said seriously, "At that time, they will be arrested by the patrol team of the base to extract the superpower genes, and they will be engraved with the racial imprint of surveillance. Awakened ones with rare powers have to go through a series of perverted transformation experiments." Luo Ziyuan looked at Mu Qiu and Lu Jianqian, who were wearing black robes, and nodded slowly. "I saw a faint purple box hanging around Mu Qiu's neck, with lines as fine as blood lines carved on it. The third lost holy object, the box of monsters. Before, they only got along with her with the mentality of making good friends, and more towards the powerful S-level awakened person Lu Jianqian. But Mu Qiu, who now owns the demon box, is undoubtedly more worthy of their win. Be alert, we are going back to base." Luo Ziyuan said seriously to the companions around him, who all had solemn expressions on their faces. I saw Luo Ziyuan turning around and turning a handle on the top of the stone statue. The stone statue immediately dislocated, and a groove appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Immediately afterwards, Luo Ziyuan solemnly took out a blue energy crystal core from his arms. The energy level of the crystal core is not high, but it contains a trace of overflowing space power. Space crystal core. Mu Qiu immediately recognized that what Luo Ziyuan was holding was the rare space crystal core. The power of space is quite rare, and those with space powers are extremely troublesome beings. This can be seen from Ji Yufeng. Ji Yufeng has few opponents at the same level. Because of this, space crystal nuclei are as rare as elemental crystal nuclei. Even weapons such as space boxes can only achieve the purpose of storing weapons by compressing the space within them through a trace of space energy. And Mu Qiu could also sense that the energy contained in the space crystal core in Luo Ziyuan's hand was obviously running low. Luo Ziyuan put the blue space crystal core in his hand into the groove on the stone statue and took a few steps back. I saw the simple stone statue suddenly blooming with a dazzling light. As the stone statue shines brightly, the rich power of space gradually gathers in front of the stone statue to form a square door of space. Luo Ziyuan explained. Detection devices are installed in all directions of the Zilan base. If ordinary people want to enter, they must go through complicated reviews. Mu Qiu immediately understood that someone with a shady identity like the rebels could not openly enter the base. So they specially set up this kind of channel to shuttle through space to and from the base. As soon as he finished speaking, Luo Ziyuan took the lead and stepped into the light door. Several people from the resistance army followed closely and entered the space gate. Mu Qiu looked at the energy-filled space channel in front of her. He looked at Lu Qianqian and smiled slightly. Now, we can go see this old friend in Zilan base. He is also curious about the strength of Zilan base. As Mu Qiu and the two figures disappeared into the light door, the flickering space power in front of the stone statue was completely extinguished. The portal to Zilan base was also completely closed. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 276. As one of the top human bases, Zilan base naturally has its own unique features. With its advanced science and technology and advanced weapons and equipment, it has become the object of favor for many human bases. All bases are salivating over the weapons and equipment produced by Zilan base, and no human base wants to be hostile to it. Even though the previous Yuhei base had 3 destructive level guardians, its foundation was still weaker than that of Zilan base. In this doomsday fortress famous for its technology, towering circular buildings line the streets, and floating vehicles shuttle and drift over the city. Tall robots are moving on the streets, and their deep red pupils monitor the slightest movement in the city. Shops with open doors can be seen everywhere around the streets, and the service staff inside are not human faces, but also service robots with metallic luster on the surface. From time to time, several tall orcs wearing various costumes and different appearances can be seen on the streets, walking around the city like ordinary people, without any sense of disobedience. The whole city does not seem to have the despair of the end of the world, but rather has a bit of a technological future city atmosphere. On the ground floor of a building near the city center, as the automated mechanical door opened, several figures quietly walked out. Is this the passage for you to enter and exit the base? Mu Qiu looked at Luo Ziyuan and his party with a strange expression. In front of them, there was a tall plaque hanging. The lights on the sign were flashing, and there were a few big words engraved on it, "Public Toilet." A trace of embarrassment flashed across the latter's face, and he explained. Most of the exits of the passages are located in inconspicuous places, so they will not attract attention. Mu Qiu did not delve into this issue, but instead looked at the technological city in front of him. Although he had known about this before, when he really saw the true face of the city, Mu Qiu's eyes couldn't help but flash a strange color. The city is full of mechanized equipment, and patrol soldiers like robots can be seen everywhere. Suspended trains shuttle through the air, and tall buildings are more magnificent than before the end of the world. It is hard to imagine that the city has become like this in just a few years. Orcs are walking around the streets, and there is no despair and grief in the end of the world on their faces. Instead, they are peaceful and indifferent. The people here are a little strange. Miuccio noticed keenly that most of these creatures he saw on the street no longer look like humans. Instead, most of them are orcs with the appearance of various wild beasts. The few humans who occasionally appear are awakeners with supernatural energy in their bodies. Miuccio can feel the thin energy from these orcs, but this weak energy is very unstable, which is better than nothing. Most of the awakened people who can transform into various orcs are powerful, and naturally they have a lot of supernatural powers in their bodies. But the energy contained in the orcs that appeared in front of Miuccio in this base is not much stronger than that of ordinary humans. As if seeing Miuccio's doubts, Luo Ziyuan explained. These orcs are mutants that survived after transformation. The senior management of Zilan base extracted the genes of animals and beasts and merged them with humans. Some humans died because they could not withstand the conflict of blood. Some of the genes in humans were merged with the genes of beasts, and became the mutants you see now. The strength of these mutants is naturally not as good as that of orthodox awakeners, but they are stronger in physique, and their number is much larger than that of awakeners. Therefore, although the status of these mutants in the base is not as good as that of awakeners with superpowers, it is still higher than that of ordinary people. Miuccio nodded slightly, and it sounded as if these orcs had become the civilians in the base. And ordinary humans were relegated to sewer rats and were not welcomed. That's why many people, even though they know that the experiment is life-threatening, still sign up for human experiments again and again. Just to live a normal life in the base. Miuccio looked around the high-tech city in front of him. A group of robots holding guns are patrolling non-stop, and alarm equipment can be seen everywhere in the city. Life here is indeed much more comfortable. In the center of a group of towering circular buildings, an extremely large metal building appeared in front of Miuccio. This tall building alone occupies an area of several football fields, and the outer shell is wrapped in a strange silver metal. The height is the highest of all buildings, and the top pierces the sky like a fortress. From a distance, it looks more like a huge space battleship. Luo Ziyuan followed Miuccio's gaze, staring at the tall building like a fortress in the distance, and slowly said. This is the core experimental building of Zilan base, the ultimate goal of our resistance army. The terminal brain building. In a secret training base in Zilan base. The walls on all four sides were covered with white metal, and there were still a few scratches on the solid walls. There were rows of tall mechas with unique styles built on them, and high-tech equipment was hung on the walls. In the center of the venue stood a long-haired man in tight combat uniform. In front of the man, a black-robed man was reporting the intelligence he had learned in detail to the long-haired man. As the black-robed man learned more about the intelligence, the expression on the long-haired man's face remained indifferent. What I want was lost by you. The long-haired man spoke slowly in a low voice until the black-robed man finished reporting. Yes, it's the rebels. The black-robed man's voice began to tremble and he bowed. We didn't expect the rebels to take advantage of the other team's exploration and suddenly attack. We were short of manpower, so we let. The black-robed man didn't finish his words, but his voice stagnated. The long-haired man stretched out his hand and clamped the black-robed man's neck, and the veins on his arm bulged. The black-robed man had no time to struggle, and his pupils contracted violently. In less than a few breaths, there was a crisp sound of shattering from the black-robed man's neck, and his head tilted and he was completely silent. The long-haired man lowered his head, making it impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. However, a fierce sound of grinding teeth could be heard from his mouth. Rebels. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 277. It's unimaginable that the city has developed to this extent. In a remote corner of the technological city center, Lu Qianqian, wearing a black robe, stood next to Miuccio. Her rosy little mouth opened slightly, looking at the towering buildings in front of her in astonishment. Mu Qiu looked at Lu Qianqian and said doubtfully, "Have you not been here before?" Lu Qianqian shook her head. "My previous mission here was to trade technological equipment, and the location was designated by the Zilan base. As for the heart of the city, I haven't been to it yet." As she spoke, Lu Qianqian turned her attention to the technological streets again, the surprise in her eyes not diminishing. "Indeed, it is simply difficult for ordinary people to build such an advanced base that surpasses the level of human technology. Whether it's these high-tech robots or super potions that strengthen the human body, or even the box weapons held by combat troops. All kinds of technologies have far exceeded the level that humans can currently research. This is what Mu Qiu has always suspected before." Looking at the mutant orcs that could be seen everywhere on the streets, Mu Qiu's eyes revealed a thoughtful look. Once at the hetero-cult stronghold in Lannan City, Mu Qiu had seen mutant monsters transformed into human survivors after being cruelly transformed. But the transformation of those irrational mutated monsters was not as complete as the orcs in front of them. Looking back at the mummified villagers in Daowen Mountain Village, the human body modification technology at Zilan base is obviously improving steadily. But this also happens to confirm that Zilan base does have some kind of close connection with the alien church. "How about Brother Qiu, this city is a little different from your base, isn't it?" Luo Ziyuan stepped forward and smiled at Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu laughed and said, "At least on the surface, this is indeed the utopia of humankind's ideal." Luo Ziyuan nodded, and like Mu Qiu, looked at the tall bunker standing in the distance, and sighed. "Yes, no one knows what is hidden under this seemingly beautiful future city." While everyone was talking, a tall training robot suddenly galloped past in the distance. I saw this robot's left mechanical arm, and its right arm is a cylindrical laser turntable. With tail flames emitting from his feet, he was in front of everyone in an instant, and the cannon barrel of his right arm was also aimed at everyone. The patrol robot said indifferently in a mechanical voice. "Mark not recognized, humans, show your racial mark." When the robot's figure came in front of everyone, the faces of the rebels suddenly showed solemn looks. Luo Ziyuan waved his hand slightly and smoothed up his clothes, revealing the red mark on his right arm. Seeing this, others also showed their own racial marks. The scanner on the tall robot's face scanned everyone's marks one by one, and the green light flashed under the red mask. After a few breaths, the patrol robot put away the laser cannon mounted on its right arm, and said in a cold mechanical voice, "Dear Awakened One, I wish you a happy life." Although the words he spoke were blessings, they were cold and emotionless, making people unable to feel any warmth. After saying that, the tail flames at the feet of the patrol robot rose, and it walked away towards the tall building in the distance. The patrol robots hovering around the streets were also patrolling everywhere. "It seems that we are still very popular here." Mu Qiu looked at Luo Ziyuan with a teasing tone. Luo Ziyuan smiled bitterly and said, "The individual combat power of these patrol robots is not high, but they are superior in large numbers and are set up in every corner of the neighborhood. Once a problem is discovered, it will be quickly communicated to the combat troops at the base through the terminal brain. If you are targeted by these robots, it will be extremely difficult to escape." As Luo Ziyuan said, the rebels also put on black robes, and their heads were lowered so that their faces could not be seen clearly. "There are surveillance and identification devices around, be careful not to be discovered." With that said, everyone was about to leave when they heard a scream coming from the street not far ahead. At the corner of the technological city ahead, a man in slightly disheveled clothes let out a miserable cry and fell to the ground. The man's feet were covered with large pools of blood, and his right leg was pierced by a laser beam from his waist. The thigh was bloody, and a bloody hole in the leg was still flowing with blood. In front of the man was a tall patrol robot, with black smoke still emitting from the cannon barrel attached to the mechanical arm. The man's tragic situation immediately attracted a large number of modified orcs and awakened people to watch. Detection mark: does not meet the standards of awakened people. Subject: you have exceeded the restricted territory. According to the base regulations, the intruders will be eliminated immediately. A cold mechanical voice came from the robot's mouth, but the words it said were extremely despairing. No. Don't. The man, who was still losing a lot of blood on his leg, turned pale when he heard the sound made by the robot. Not even caring about the large, fuzzy, and festering wounds on his legs, he exclaimed, "I came to the central area to take my wife to see a doctor. I have Jingyuan." The man's eyes showed fear, and his twisted face was full of pleading. As he spoke, he took out a bracelet from his bosom, and a string of numbers was engraved on the screen. "Please, spare me." The man didn't know whether it was because he was too excited or because his wound was torn, but sweat was pouring down his forehead. "Citizens who trespass into the central area shall be executed according to the law, and their crimes are unforgivable." The screen on the robot's head flashed a deep red, and there was no mercy in his voice. The next second, before the man could say anything else, the laser cannon between the robot's arms shot out dozens of hot beams in succession. In an instant, the man lying on the ground was pierced by countless lasers, and a large amount of blood spurted out like a waterfall. With a plop, the man's body, which was shot into a bloody sieve, knelt on the ground, with a deep despair in his pupils. When the patrol robot eliminated the invader, it flew away directly. The orcs and awakened people watching around sighed and dispersed, with normal expressions, and some even had sarcastic sneers on their faces. It seemed that they had already gotten used to it. Soon, a special cleaning robot arrived at the scene, skillfully dragged away the broken body, and cleaned up the blood splattered on the ground. In less than a moment, the original murder scene had been cleaned up, as if nothing had happened just now. "Asshole!" The rebels couldn't help but beat their chests and stamp their feet when they saw this, and everyone's face showed indignation. The youngest Mao Yuming almost rushed up to argue after seeing the indifference of others. These are all their fellow human beings. Luo Ziyuan stopped the impulsive Mao Yuming and sighed to Mu Qiu and the others. "We are now in the central area of Zilan base. This is the area where awakened people and mutants live in the base. Ordinary humans live in the civilian area outside the central area. No matter what the reason, humans who break into the central area without permission will be eliminated by these patrol robots once they are discovered." Luo Ziyuan explained that similar situations are everywhere in the city. These humans escaped the cruel zombie apocalypse in the outside world, but died tragically under the machines developed by humans themselves. Seeing this, Mu Qiu nodded slowly, looking at the body of the human man being dragged away, with a thoughtful look on his face. He originally thought that Luo Ziyuan and his group of rebels would add some negative modifications to the description of Zilan base. But now it seems that the attitude of this base towards ordinary survivors is indeed very different from that of awakened people. "Let's go, we can't stay here for too long." Luo Ziyuan reminded his companions, unconsciously lowering his hood a little. For the rebels, there are too many uncertain dangers in the central area, and staying for a long time will be exposed. Mu Qiu followed behind a few people, looked back at the towering terminal brain building behind him, and a smile rose at the corner of his mouth. In this way, he can be regarded as a successful infiltration, right? Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 278. Luo Ziyuan led everyone through several blocks. The surrounding scenes kept changing, and the tops of the tall buildings behind him gradually disappeared into the clouds. Observing that the number of patrol robots around them gradually decreased, everyone once again opened the box containing the floating locomotive. In an instant, several locomotives were spraying tail flames through the air, speeding in one direction. Everyone was driving their motorcycles in the air, already some distance away from the ground, but several cars that were also floating in the air passed by them from time to time. The principles of these cars are similar to those of levitating motorcycles, with the wheels underneath turning into jet power devices. The wind roared in my ears, and as the tall buildings in the city next to me gradually became lower and lower, the figures of orcs and awakened ones became increasingly rare on the streets below. The number of patrol robots and mechanized equipment that can be seen everywhere on the road is not as sophisticated as in the central area. After a while, Luo Ziyuan led everyone to the junction of the central area and the civilian area. The most intuitive manifestation is that the tall modern urban buildings have disappeared. What appeared in front of everyone was a low bungalow common in human bases. Luo Ziyuan drove the suspended motorcycle to a sudden stop, turned to Mu Qiu and said, "I will now return to the headquarters to report the results of the mission. You two will rest here for a while. I will ask the headquarters for your instructions." Mu Qiu smiled and nodded. "Please." If Luo Ziyuan really brought a friend he had met outside for a few days back to the headquarters so easily, then there is no need for this resistance organization to exist. "Yuming, please find a place for Brother Qiu and Miss Lu to live first." Luo Ziyuan turned around and ordered Mao Yuming beside him. "Okay, uncle." Although Mao Yuming is only a half-year-old boy, he can do things happily. Mao Yuming smiled, ran to Mu Qiu and said, "Brother Qiu and Sister Lu, come with me. I'm very familiar with the slums." Mao Yuming raised his fist and hammered his chest, looking very confident and reliable. Before Luo Ziyuan left, he gave Mu Qiu a bracelet-like device and told them that if anything happened, he could contact them at any time through the bracelet. Mu Qiu noticed that this bracelet was exactly the same as the one taken out by the man who was shot by the robot just now. The screen above boasted a series of 4-digit numbers. From what the man said before, this string of fictitious numbers seems to be the base's universal currency. It seems to be called Jingyuan. After explaining, Luo Ziyuan took the remaining rebel companions to drive a motorcycle and speed away in the other direction. Mu Qiu and Lu Qianqian, under the leadership of Mao Yuming, walked towards the civilian area. Along the way, Mu Qiu noticed that the houses here still looked like pre-apocalyptic scenes. Even some high-rise buildings have collapsed and been converted into low-rise tiled houses. The crowd of people moving around them no longer looked like orcs, but instead there were scattered human figures. The clothes of these people looked quite old. What was strange was that their faces were full of malaise. They were all walking in a hurry and looked tired. Mu Qiu could sense that these people were ordinary survivors who had no special powers and had not undergone transformation experiments. "Is this what you call a slum?" Mu Qiu looked at the surrounding environment, although it was far less developed and prosperous than the central area. But as a human base alone, it was quite comfortable. In his opinion, this place could not be called a slum. Mao Yuming shook his head slightly and said, "A lot of the people who live here have been evicted from the central area. Since the transformation of the central area has been completed, only awakened people and mutant orcs with high racial marks are allowed to live. The original humans living inside were all abandoned to the edge of the base. This place has not experienced technological transformation, everything is still the same as it was before the end of the world. Although there are still patrol robots monitoring here, the role of these robots is to prevent human riots." Mao Yuming looked around the ground. Some street corners were already filled with rancid garbage, exuding a stench. The human beings walking on both sides of the street had dull eyes, like zombies. But the pace of these people is extremely fast, as if they are in a hurry to do some activity. Mao Yuming's tone was low and he said, "This is a civilian area abandoned by Zilan Base, but it is also a slum that many humans have spoken of." Mu Qiu asked the question he had been confused about for a long time: why are there so few humans in civilian areas? This was a problem he discovered as soon as he entered Zilan Base, except for the mutant orcs and a small number of awakened ones in the central area. Even in civilian areas where humans gather, only scattered human survivors can be seen. There are surprisingly few humans in this city. As a powerful presence in the human base, the number of humans in Zilan base is indeed too small. When Mu Qiu raised this question, Mao Yuming's expression became obviously unnatural. His tone was solemn, his expression became increasingly mature, and he said seriously and thoughtfully, "Where are the survivors in the city, in a sense? They're in another world." Oh. Mu Qiu narrowed her eyes and became interested. "What do you mean?" Mao Yuming turned around and looked at the high-tech city behind them. "Brother Qiu, have you ever heard of virtual reality technology? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord." Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 279. The low-rise buildings passed by one. Looking around, the residential area of the space seemed to be no different from the remote streets before the end of the world. Finally, Mao Yuming brought Mu Qiu and the others to a high-rise building on the edge of the space. This building is a rare high-rise building in the residential area. Although it is not as tall as the skyscrapers in the central area, it stands out from the low buildings in the slums. The whole building looks like a hotel before the end of the world. Mao Yuming led the two into the building. He whispered beside Mu Qiu, "This building is one of the bases of our resistance army in the civilian area. On weekdays, it is used to entertain some external awakeners or combat teams that are about to go out." Mu Qiu nodded slightly, and Lu Qianqian beside him complained to Mu Qiu with soul transmission. "This Zilan base is really stingy. People were arranged to live in this kind of residence when they came here." Mu Qiu smiled. "It seems that this base is really self-righteous and does not take external awakeners seriously. This is also a very normal thing. After all, these human bases are coveting Zilan's high technology. Whether the transaction will be made depends on the decision of Zilan base itself. So some small and medium-sized human bases are eager to curry favor with this future city known as the City of Hope for Mankind." While chatting and laughing, Mao Yuming brought the two to the front desk of the hotel building. He looked around quietly, revealing a pendant on his chest. "Come for a double room, the bed must be big enough." As he said that, he took out a bracelet on his wrist. The receptionist was a woman. When she saw Mao Yuming showing the pendant engraved with a special pattern, the woman immediately understood, took out a scanner-like device, and flashed a beam of blue light on the screen of the bracelet. The value on the bracelet screen was instantly deducted. Without extra-verbal communication, the woman just nodded to Mao Yuming and handed over the access card. "Please move to room 1006 upstairs." The whole process was very natural. After a while, the three of them took the elevator to go upstairs slowly. In front of the elevator, Mao Yuming whispered to Mu Qiu, "The surveillance here will be transmitted to the terminal brain building in the central area, so the necessary procedures still need to be followed." He passed by several room doors like a whirlwind tour. Mu Qiu could keenly sense the breath of living people in these rooms. But strangely, he didn't hear any sound of activity in the room. Mao Yuming took the two to a room with the number 1006. After swiping the access card, the door opened with a beep. Mu Qiu walked into the room and found that the decoration inside was no different from the hotel before the end of the world. The area of the room was quite large. From the extended floor-to-ceiling window, you could just see the tall central building in the distance. This reminded Mu Qiu of his independent villa in Yuhe. However, what Mu Qiu cared about most was that there were two unique helmets placed in front of the bedside table in the room. The helmet was made of white metal all over, and it would completely cover the head when worn like a motorcycle helmet. The helmet looked quite heavy, and Mu Qiu picked up a helmet and looked at it for a while. Strangely, He actually felt a special soul energy from this helmet-like device. Is this the port you mentioned to log into the game? Mu Qiu turned his head and looked at Mao Yuming. The latter stared at the mechanical helmet in Mu Qiu's hand, lost in thought. After a while, Mao Yuming slowly explained. In addition to conducting human transformation experiments, scientists at the base also focus on researching high-tech in various aspects. And this helmet that can shuttle between virtual and reality is the masterpiece developed by the base, the mental linkage device. After wearing this helmet, through the connection to the brain nerves, the whole person's spirit will be immersed in a brand new world. In this immersive game world, everything in the real world will be isolated. You will no longer have all kinds of troubles in reality, and completely experience a brand new life. And the key to another world requires nothing more than an ordinary energy crystal core. Mao Yuming said a shocking fact in ordinary words. Mu Qiu looked around the high-tech helmet in his hand and was amazed. Then, Mao Yuming continued. The senior management of Zilan Base has a firm control over mechanical equipment and other weapons. But they are very generous and offer this virtual helmet that can immerse the mind into another world to the public for free. For a time, countless humans who wanted to escape reality flocked to another world, and most of the ordinary people in the base were addicted to this virtual world. Some time ago, this kind of game helmet was also circulated in other human bases, and even some powerful awakeners were willing to immerse themselves in the virtual space. Hearing Mao Yuming's story, Mu Qiu instantly understood the thoughts of these humans who were addicted to the virtual world. The real world has long been occupied by mutated zombie monsters, and the human race is in decline. In this situation, many people have despaired of the real world, especially those ordinary humans who have no special powers and are still bullied and discriminated against in the base. Therefore, these people choose to numb themselves by immersing themselves in the second life of the game world. The Zilan high-level officials have been advocating for humans to enter the game world, and have also set up many generous rewards according to the levels in the game. Even the currency in the game, Crystal Source, is connected to the real world and has become the main currency of the Zilan base. For a time, it attracted countless humans to enter the virtual world carefully created by the high-level officials of the base. Even some awakened people and mutants were no exception and sank into the game world. With the appearance of the game helmet, the voices of opposition in the base have been rapidly weakened, which is also a big blow to our resistance army. Mao Yuming said with a strange look. Uncle has always opposed us using helmets to enter the virtual world, saying that this is the base's spiritual poisoning of the human race. Lu Qianqian on the side said with concentration. If the world in the game is the same as the real world, spiritual satisfaction in the virtual world may also be a good choice for ordinary people. This is why the ordinary survivors seen by the two along the way are extremely rare. Mu Qiu nodded with a smile, without comment. Of course, in comparison, this is nothing more than the weak's escape from reality and helpless compromise. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 280. Mao Yuming seemed to be quite familiar with this mental linkage device. He explained in detail to Mu Qiu and Lu Qianqian how to use the helmet. He also told them some precautions in the base, such as not to easily set foot in the central area of the base. There are too many dangers there. And the terminal brain building located in the core area is an absolute forbidden area of Zilan base. Without a pass, even Lu Qianqian, who is as strong as S level, will die. Although Mao Yuming is only a half-grown boy, he does things without any leaks. After a while, Mao Yuming completed the reconciliation mission, and it was time to return to the resistance headquarters. Before leaving, Mao Yuming cast a meaningful look at Mu Qiu. I wish brother Qiu and sister Lu a pleasant night. This little devil. Lu Qianqian's pretty face was rosy, and she glanced at Mu Qiu with expectation. Mu Qiu suddenly said, "Follow him." The resistance group was wary of Mu Qiu and the others. Mu was also curious about this resistance organization. After receiving Mu's order, Lu Qianqian pouted and looked disappointed. Oh! The next second, Lu Qianqian's figure disappeared in front of Mu. Lu Qianqian is a smart person. She knows when to act like a spoiled child in front of Mu. She never makes Mu unhappy when it comes to serious matters such as executing tasks. After Lu Qianqian left, Mu slowly walked to the French window on the windowsill. Here, he can clearly see the core area of the Zilan base in the distance. Among the tall buildings, a huge high-rise building like a bunker is extremely conspicuous. The Terminal Brain Building. Mu sat on a chair beside him, slowly closed his eyes, and pretended to doze. The next moment, in a field that ordinary people cannot see, a soul flew out of Mu's body. Soul out of the body. Mu has not used this ability for a long time. Compared with before, after absorbing the soul abilities of various human heretics and devouring the power of the soul fruit. Now Mu's soul strength has been raised to an extremely strong level. Even the flame demon soul in the body is afraid of the powerful strength of Mu's body and dares not come out to make trouble. On the contrary, Mu can rely on his powerful soul power to eliminate the unfriendly neighbor in the body. But for the flame demon soul, Mu has a new plan. Back to the point, Mu's soul penetrated the wall and quickly shuttled through the hotel room. He observed that most of the humans in the hotel were lying on the bed, wearing a helmet-shaped mental linkage device on their heads. Obviously, these people were immersed in the virtual world compiled by the Zilan base. After a while, Mu controlled the soul to cross the wall of the hotel and pass through the silent residential area. It is difficult for ordinary people to detect the location of this soul. The speed of the soul is much faster than those hovercrafts. In a short while, Mu flew to the central area full of awakened people and mutants. Here, Mu was quite surprised to find that these patrol robots were equipped with a unique sound wave search device. This special sound wave actually has a detection effect on the soul body, specifically targeting those invisible and intangible soul energies. But how powerful is Mu's soul power? Mu controlled the soul to hide in a space barrier. Even these sound wave suanas that detect souls cannot penetrate the space to find the location of the soul. The soul passed through a series of towering buildings, and after a while, it came to a huge building like a bunker. As soon as it arrived in front of the building called End Brain Building, Mu controlled the soul to stop in the air. In front of this giant building that stretched to the sky and could not see the top. He sensed a shield barrier composed of soul energy, isolating everything inside. The soul energy contained in this barrier is extremely strong, and there is even sound wave detection in the barrier. He could force his way through, but once he entered, he would be sensed by the existence inside. As the core area of Zilan base, there must be danger inside. Mu thought for a while, and the wisp of soul floating in the air quickly dissipated. In a hotel high-rise in the residential area, Mu suddenly opened his eyes, and a touch of red flashed in his eyes. Then, Mu exuded a terrifying devouring breath. He was trying to sense the devouring breath in Shueqinya's body. However, this time his sense was indeed stronger than in Yuhe base. But the devouring power on Shueqinya seemed to be looming, and he could not sense the specific location. All of this was within Mu's expectations. If this base was so easy to detect, it would be unworthy of being called the City of Hope for mankind. It is not Mu's style to break through rashly. He must first understand the strength and trump cards of his opponent. It seems that all this still needs to find a breakthrough in the resistance army. A simple understanding of the surface situation of Zilan base. Mu turned his attention to the high-tech helmet called mental linkage device. Since Zilan base is promoting this kind of helmet that leads to the virtual world, there must be a purpose. Mu thought that this should not just be to paralyze the spirit of the survivors and suppress the arrogance of the resistance army. Taking out the bracelet that Luo Ziyuan had given him before, Yu looked at it for a while. The texture of the bracelet was just ordinary rubber, but the real core was the finger-width screen on it. This screen was actually made entirely of energy crystal cores. And inside, Yu felt a touch of soul breath that originated from the mechanical helmet. Yu took off the screen made of the crystal core above, and his right hand released a white healing halo. The white halo carried a soft energy into the crystal core, and a flash of light suddenly flashed on the screen. Then, Yu embedded the shining crystal core into a groove on the mechanical helmet. With the insertion of the crystal core, the mechanical helmet called the spiritual linkage device also fully operated. The blue light of the mechanical helmet in his hand was bright. According to Mao Yuming, the helmet in this state can be operated. www. The key to another world. Feeling the weak energy floating in the helmet, Yu suddenly smiled. The next second, Yu sat on the rocking chair holding the helmet, but directly injected a wisp of soul into it. In an instant, Yu only felt a soul energy coming from the helmet, and instantly wrapped up Yu's soul. Seeing this, Yu did not resist, and his mind gradually sank into the virtual soul space. After a dark silence, a dazzling white light suddenly flashed in front of Yu's eyes, and a woman's gentle voice came to his ears. "Respected Awakener, welcome to the Divine Realm continent.